Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. For those of you new here, I'm Sneha, and today I'm going to be doing the All About Eyeshadow Palettes tag. I had recently watched Antariksha and I believe Morgan Turner who had done this tag video, and I thought their choices were amazing. And if you didn't know, I do love eyeshadow palettes, and who doesn't want to talk about them? So I decided I would do this video as well. The tag was originally started by Samantha, March, and Allie, so I will list their channels in the description box below. But let's get started. So the first question is, show your newest palette. The last palette that I've ordered has not reached me yet, which is from Pat McGrath, but the one that has been here is my recent Viseart order, and it was an order for 3 palettes. So those 3 palettes are, the first one is the Viseart Shushu palette, and I've done a 3 looks 1 palette video with this. I'm just going to link it as a card right here if you'd like to watch the video. But this is what the palette looks like inside. Beautiful colors for this time of the year. The next one I picked up is the Viseart Bohemian Dream palette. So this is like almost satin shimmery shades. And the last one I picked up is the Libertine palette by Viseart. The packaging is absolutely gorgeous. And this is what the colors look like inside. I haven't used it yet except for swatching these shades when I first got it. So I will be reviewing this at a later point. So those are the newest palettes in my eyeshadow palette collection. The next one is show your oldest palette. When I first started with buying eyeshadows, I invested in single eyeshadows because they were cheaper at that point compared to buying a whole palette. So those are the first products that I bought, but if you are looking at a whole palette that I purchased, it was the Urban Decay Naked Original palette, and that's the reason I think this palette will probably never leave my collection. This is what the shades look like. I have hardly used this palette, probably only when I first received it, and even back then I would create looks which weren't too obvious, if that makes sense. At that point I genuinely liked softer looks and more neutral looks and eyeshadows that you can barely see on the skin. So this palette was lovely for that, except for these darker tones of course. So I would focus on this half of the palette generally. And at that point, this was I believe around $50 or something, and it felt so expensive just because I was initially buying just single eyeshadows. Generally from MAC, so they were around, the refill ones were around $6 or $10 I want to say, or from Makeup Geek, so that's how I built my eyeshadow collection. So this one, which was around £50 or $50, because I lived in the US back then, felt a little too steep. But I did buy this at that point, and this is definitely the oldest palette in my collection. Next is show your most expensive palette. For this, I did have to look up the prices online just because I didn't remember, and I just instinctively thought that it would be Pat McGrath, but it's actually a Natasha Denona palette. This is the Star palette, and this retails for $169. And this is what the palette looks like inside. Looks like I've barely made a dent, but I have used many of these shades from this palette, especially this quadrant. In contrast, the next question is show me your most affordable palettes. And for this, I believe it's almost a tie because they're almost the same price, just that the currency is different. So when I was in the US, this would be probably my most affordable palette in my collection. This is by Wet n Wild, and this is the Comfort Zone. Very old palette. They've even remade this palette, that's how old this is. But I genuinely liked the formula at that point. It was very soft and creamy. Even now, I do enjoy the formula. It's not the most pigmented compared to all the other eyeshadows that I have, but I still think it's a good palette for the amount of money I spent. I believe this was around $5 or under, maybe $4.99 or so. But after being in the UK, I would say these Revolution eggs are probably some of the more affordable ones that I have. They're again priced at the £5 mark. So this is what they look like inside, and you get matte and shimmery shades and also a couple of face highlighters. So I do think they're good value for money, but if I had to do the currency conversion, this would come out cheaper. Next question is show your everyday palette, and unfortunately or fortunately, because I'm a makeup artist and a YouTuber, I have a wide range of eyeshadow palettes, and I'm also constantly testing different formulas out to add to my kit or for review purposes on YouTube. So I don't have one palette that I keep using all the time. It does keep changing. Some days I don't even wear any eyeshadow. I just probably wear a wing liner or just mascara and have a bold lip with it. But if I had to pick one palette that's, ready to buy, I guess, not custom made, I would have to give it to the AV8 Jackie Aina palette, just because it has a good mix of neutrals with the browns right here, and the colors right here. So you can go from a neutral look to a nice colorful yet soft look. And you have some beautiful shimmers in here. You have matte shades. So I really like the mix of the shades and formulas and also the quality of the formula. Next is show me your most colorful palette. And it had to be the Viseart Editorial Brights palette. Again, it's an all matte palette. It's again depotted and bits of it are here. The orange yellows, the blue that you see here, some of the pinks and purples. So since I've depotted, I'm just going to insert a picture right here so you can have a better look at the palette. Next up is show me your smallest palette. And I couldn't decide between these three. So it's a Charlotte Tilbury Quad versus the Viseart Petite Pro. So this is just Shoo Shoo, for example. And then the mini Tropic palette from Natasha Denona. So being the nerd that I am, I actually took out the dimensions of this, and by volume, the Natasha Denona Tropic is the smallest palette. The next question is show me your biggest palette. And without doubt, it's the Revolution palette. This is the Emily Edit, the Wands palette. This palette was gifted to me by Safia, but other than swatching these when I first got it, I haven't really gotten around to using many of these shades. But from first impressions, based just on the swatches, these are really nice and pigmented, especially for the price that the palette is. Next is show your palette with the best memory. Now, again, there's not one palette that's ready-made with which I have associated a lot of memories with, but I would have to give credit to my custom-made MAC palettes. This is one of them right here, depotted into a Makeup Forever palette. There's some more in here. So I do have quite a lot of them, and I build them as singles. So I would say the MAC eyeshadow palettes are definitely something that bring a lot of memory, because I would save money to buy individual eyeshadows at that point back in 2008, late 2008, 2009 mostly, I think. And I used to live in Indiana in the US back then, and there was just one MAC Pro store, at least back then, I don't know about now. I would look up to driving up there and buying these MAC products. A big shout out to Jen Tura, who used to work there. She was a fantastic retail artist at that particular MAC store, and she helped me so much in terms of understanding what shades would look best on me. Again, back then, I didn't want eyeshadows that would show up on my skin tone, if you can even believe that. I wanted something that was very nude, close to my skin tone, barely there kind of a look. And that's why I ended up with so many brown eyeshadows. If you can see the top row almost. They're quite subtle in differences, but I absolutely love and treasure my MAC eyeshadows. And they will always hold a special place in my collection. By the way, if you're enjoying this video, definitely don't forget to hit the like button and also consider subscribing. Next is show a palette worth the hype. I didn't have to think much about it. I definitely think ABH Jackie Aina palette. I don't know if this palette had as much hype as so many other ABH palettes, but I definitely think this is worth the money. Show a palette not worth the hype. I didn't have to think much about this. It had to be this palette, which is the Urban Decay Naked 3 palette. Here, open it and show it to you guys. Look at these shades. They are so dull. For lack of other words, other than probably one or two dark shades, everything it's like blah. If I look at it, it doesn't excite me, doesn't do anything more or less. Half these shades don't even show up on my skin tone, so it's like meh. So this is one of my palette regrets, and I had no plans of buying it, I think. I think my husband, just because he wanted me to have the continuity of Naked series, at least back then, he did buy me this as a gift. So that's the only reason this is still in my collection. Next up is show your favorite palette from a favorite brand. Now I do have a few favorite brands, Viseart being one, especially for the matte formulas. Secondly, Pat McGrath. And thirdly, Natasha Denona. ABH is a hit or mix, but just this exception of Jackie Aina palette would probably be some of my favorite formulas. But in terms of overall favorite brand and how much I own from each brand, I think Viseart definitely wins. I have almost all their palettes, which is kind of scary. And my favorite palette, if I had to pick one, would probably be the Milieu palette, which is the Neutral Mattes Volume 2. It is absolutely brilliant. That's in terms of an all matte palette. So I have depotted the matte palette, so I'm just going to insert a picture right here so you can see what I'm talking about. The formula is brilliant. The pigmentation on these is absolutely stunning. These are somehow, I don't know, they're not as hard pressed as some of their older formulas. And I really like the tones and undertones in this particular palette, especially for those brown shades in here. They are beautiful. And if I had to cheat and include also an all shimmer palette from Viseart, it would be the Grande Pro Volume 2. Absolutely beautiful. You get so many different shimmery textures and also colors, so you can't go wrong with it. Next is Show Your Most Used palette. Now, unfortunately, I don't have any ready-made palette that I use quite frequently. I would say probably the custom-made palette that I have here from Viseart is the one I reach for the most. The one that would come close to it, I guess, in terms of an already ready-made palette that you can buy would be the ABA Jackie Aina palette. Next is Show Your Most Underrated palette, and I couldn't decide between these two. One is more as a brand, and whereas the other one is a specific palette. So let's talk about the brand first, which is The Balm. I don't know why people don't talk about it as much, because the shadows are really good quality. They are very creamy and buttery to touch. The shimmer quality is exceptional, and so is the matte quality. So this is what this one looks like. So that's something I feel like not many people talk about anymore, especially their eyeshadows. And the second one that I want to talk about is the Persona Identity palette. This was launched by the YouTuber Sona, and I don't know, I really enjoy this palette. It has a good mix of shimmer and matte shades, and mostly neutral tones except for a few colors, which is the orange, rusty orange, and the purple shade. But otherwise, a really good everyday palette that I see many people can get use from. So again, I don't find many people talking about this palette on YouTube anyway. And that's it. That wraps up the eyeshadow palette tag. I really hope you enjoyed watching this. If you'd like to answer the questions, I am going to leave it in the description box below. I mean, if you're a YouTuber, definitely make a video out of it. If you're not, leave it in the comment section below. It's always fun to read what palettes you guys pick. But thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye!